welcome to yet another inductions session for you. This session covers the introduction on the port and logistic business, which is very essential and important. In fact, for the group, it has been the start point for all the other businesses on the infrastructure. So this year, a record 61 students have opted for ports and shipping as an elective, and we definitely look forward to those who are genuinely and keenly interested to pursue this as a career option. And we will have no other person who is better than Captain Abhyankar, who has been a friend, philosopher, and a colleague in the past. And he has been the main responsible force behind the success of the port and maritime business at Mundra. So I request Captain Unmesh Abhyankar to introduce you to all the subject of ports and the logistic business. May I now request Captain Abhyankar to take over and take it on further. If you have any questions in between, please raise your hand and put your questions in the chat box. I will try and monitor and reply as much as we can possibly do. Okay, over to Captain Abhyankar.
Well, good afternoon, everybody who's attending. This is the first time I'm actually giving a lecture to a computer screen. So it might sound odd to all of you, and it's a little difficult for me also. But I guess we have to be quite adaptive to way changes are happening. And with the career that I have had in the past, the sailing career of 27 years, change was always a constant. First and foremost, I would say that you have chosen a right profession for the simple reason if you look at the maritime transport and the logistics, ports forms one cog in that entire wheel. So, as a career, they say you should always be at the starting point of any revolution that is happening or any new business that is coming. Fortunately for me, when I left shipping, came into the ports, it was a nascent business. And that time somebody had asked me this question, Umesh, are you getting into the right vertical rather than going into shipping? I said, ports is the future because the potential that is there in the ports. And that has proven to be more true than I thought. To give you a little background on the ports, the first sailing that occurred in part of the international logistics or global logistics was 1492 when they set sail with some wooden ship. Wanted to set sail somewhere, they landed somewhere else because setting sail those days was a nightmare because you didn't have all the GPS and satellite navigation systems. So you're going with the sextant, sun, moon, and stars. So people, when they did land wherever they were. But it was a big learning curve. So you're looking at, say, 100 tons of cargo moving, or even less than that, those ships which were there that time. And if you look at the ships which are moving the oceans today, you're looking at about 300,000, 350,000 tons of cargo which moves. So ports, when I say, and logistics, I would put it as a supply chain management in which ports and the other paraphernalia that goes associated with the entire supply chain. Ports forms one major integral part of the entire supply chain. The other major part of that entire supply chain is the shipping part of it. Now, port is incomplete without the ships. Ships are incomplete without the port. So both have a symbiotic relationship and both have to survive. Everybody must be viewing this. So if you can just skip into marinetraffic.com and see the number of ships which are plying in the oceans today. There are about 50,000 plus ships plying, which are owned all over the world. I'm talking about the major ships, that is the cargo moving ships, not the fishing trawlers and the smaller ships that we talk of. So that is the kind of cargo movement which does happen. So when I look at any piece of cargo consignment moving from, say, Europe or US or the Far East into, say, India, because we are sitting in India, the first thought that would come to anybody's mind is, why can't I fly that cargo? The options are there. Of course, you can air freight the cargo, but you're paying at least 10 to 15x the cost of a sea freight. Secondly, a jumbo jet can carry 230 tons of cargo, whereas a ship can carry 350,000 tons of cargo. So that is a big differential. So cost per ton of cargo carriage is much lesser. Then when you look at the supply chain, whatever you're loading onto the ship transits the oceans, it comes into the port. So let me dwell on what the ports are actually. When the port started many years back, as I told you, it was wooden ships. You had 50 tons at start. 50 tons was big ships those days. Many people didn't survive when they went sailing from one point to another. They encountered windless areas, so they were called the doldrums, where the equator, the winds changed, and history has come in. It was only in the 70s that the logistics chain actually had a boost because of technology, and the satellite navigation systems came in, and later on you had the newer version called the global positioning system, which has come in. So moving the cargo from one point to another became easy. But those days you had what you call the general cargo ships. One size fits all. So if you wanted to transport something, you put a wooden cage, you loaded it into the ship, it would go somewhere else. Specialization was not the key word. It was there to some point in time, but in the 50s, what happened was specialization set in, and they designed a 20-foot box. And whatever you had to put was put in the 20-foot box. Whatever was lighter went into a 40-foot box. So global think tank got in, they decided on 20 and 40. Was it the right thing? I would say in today's hindsight, I'm not saying it would have been the right size, but it took off so fast. So now it is extremely difficult to change, but that has actually revolutionized the way the goods move from point A to point B. And this is true especially for the finished goods. Out at sea, during my years of sailing, we would say whatever goes into a box will eventually go into a box, and that is what has happened, and that is what continues to happen. And this will continue to happen as you go ahead. So that is one part of the port, that is the shipping industry, that's the container. Then the second part of the logistics chain is the dry bulk. When you say dry bulk, anything that is free flowing, like you're carrying wheat, you're carrying de-oil cakes, you're carrying coal, you're carrying minerals, you're carrying iron ore. So multiple examples are there where you carry all these cargoes in bulk. Again, the erstwhile ships were small, carrying 20,000 tons. Today, the same thing you have at 450,000 tons, called the Vale Max, which goes from Brazil to China, specifically designed. And the ship design at 450,000 is the max technically that can be designed today. So that forms the dry bulk. Then you have something called the break bulk. When you say break bulk, the definition of break bulk is anything that is not bulk is break bulk. And project cargo movement, that is also forming part of the break bulk. These are three of the verticals which most of the ports have. But later on, when the technologies were there, they started digging deeper. Instead of crude oil, they realized gas is there. Now how to bottle those gas capsules into one, either you carry it in a container, but that was not an economic way of carrying. So they designed the liquid petroleum gas ships, which came in first. And at a later date, they designed the methane ships, what you call the LNG, liquefied natural gas, at minus 163 degrees. So today, when you look at a port and you're looking at a supply chain, ports and logistics, shipping forms one part of the chain. But let's get into the port and into the hinterland. So most of the ports, when you get in, you start the design, you build a berth, you build water around the berths, you bring a ship in, you can handle liquid over there, you can handle, say, LPG also, you can bring the truck in, load it directly over there, that also can be done. You can handle bulk, you can handle break bulk, you can handle practically everything except liquefied natural gas. That also you can do it, but it is extremely expensive because you got to do pre-cooling and so on and so forth. So therefore you require specialized terminals. So as the ports mature, they metamorphosize from a one size fits all to developing an asset around a commodity. Exactly what you have in the medical fraternity, you have a specialization. You have an MBBS doctor, then you have a chest specialist, you have an eye specialist, ENT, and so on and so forth. So similarly, ports have also evolved over time, and where commodities are available and commodities can sustain over a period of time, the asset gets built around that particular commodity, and that is where the efficiency factor actually comes in. And that efficiency factor, you can see it as much as 3x, 4x, 5x. So all the ports which start maturing, where you have sustainable cargo flows, that's where things stand. Now, when you look at a port design, one will wonder how many berths should I have? What is the key length? What is the depth? An efficient port design is like an inverted funnel. For the simple reason, let me give you a 25,000 TEU ship. If you bring a 25,000 TEU ship, which is a reality today, few years back it was not a reality. Today that is stretching the limits of what a container can carry. Now, assuming it comes to a port and 25,000 TEUs have to be offloaded and 25,000 TEUs have to be loaded again, that's 50,000 TEUs. One train can carry 90 plus 45 on top, so 135. So when you look at the kind of trains you're going to require to fill one ship, you're looking at 370 trains versus one ship. So that is the kind of ratio you have. So therefore, the marine side can be the smaller part of the funnel, that is an efficient port design, because one ship can carry X amount of cargo, which is far greater than what you require to evacuate. So therefore, the evacuation capacity has to be way, way, way higher than the marine side capacity. That's on the efficient design. Then you have multiple evacuation mechanisms from the ship. To give you an idea, one is road, which all of you know. Second is rail. Third is pipeline. Fourth is air. Air is also there. A lot of ports in the world are connected by air because where you get precious cargo, you have to take it to the hinterland. The parcels might be small, so instead of taking by truck or medicines or something, they do go by air. So it's not that they don't go by air. But when you can get a container load and then you are distributing, that is what happens. So these are the four evacuation techniques, that is completing the logistics supply chain, going to the last mile. Now, when you look at the entire port, so there are few KPIs that one looks at, and ports are designed around the queuing theory. I think you all must have done that in either you'll do it over here or you must have gone through it before. When you can schedule an arrival, then up to 80% you can plan. But when your arrivals are not scheduled, then anything at 65% occupancy is actually equivalent to about 100% occupancy. Otherwise, you land up with a delay. If you want to test this parameter for this KPI, go to a fuel filling station, HPC, BPC, Reliance. The first thing that comes in our mind, oh, there are 10 vehicles over there. I'm not going over there. I have to wait for, say, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. If you look at an airline counter, same story. You look at the supermarkets, same story. You look at the telecommunications. This is where it actually originated. So when you have a disaster, you try and call some of your friends, you always get line busy, network busy, because the number of connections they have versus the number of exchanges that ratio doesn't match. It's not 1:1. Similarly, it goes in the port. So an efficient port design is at the time you start having 50% berth occupancy, you start building capacity subject to cargo availability and the business being available. So by the time you hit 65% berth occupancy, your asset is ready, so there are no vessels waiting. One of the mantras that we had coined many years back, that berths should wait for ships and not the other way around. And that still holds true for the way Adani runs their ports. And therefore, we have actually done something what the private banking did to the nationalized banking. Adani Ports has actually set the ball rolling, set people's mind thinking on how the logistics chain should actually work more efficiently. That is, berths should wait for ships and not the other way around, and where you are ready to give a commitment. So on the port side, when you look at the efficiency parameters, there are multiple parameters that I talk of. One was the pre-berthing delay as a KPI. Second KPI is what is the depth available for a particular port. Now you might have read in the papers, and we used to advertise in the good old days that we were one of the first ports to have a 17-meter water depth. So you could bring in the Cape-size vessel. That used to be our USP. And we were the first ones off the block, but practically everybody followed that. So today, most of the ports which you see, which are being built, are all deep water ports. So therefore, the size of the vessel that comes in is much larger. So the cost per ton for the cargo carriage is much lesser. So therefore, that is the second KPI you're looking at. The third KPI that you're looking at is the turnaround time that the vessel has going from point A to point B. That means from the time you arrive at a port till the time you depart the port, what is the turnaround time? So turnaround time is an outcome of the productivity. Now, just to give you an example of a productivity, say coal, I think everybody knows all the coal-fired plants that we have. On a conventional coal berth, you will do a discharge of about 10,000 tons per day to 15,000 tons per day, where you are fairly efficient on a conventional port that's multi-purpose. Whereas a port which is designed as an import facility, you will go and visit Mundra Port, where it is one of the largest coal import terminals in the world. There, if with the sufficient yard capacity that is available, you can actually on a sustained basis do 7x, that is 70,000 tons per day on a sustained basis, that is with the yard choking and so on and so forth. But assuming you have an empty yard and there was no yard constraint, then you're looking at discharging 140,000 tons per day, that is 14x compared to conventional. So that is where your efficiency factors are. So your turnaround time is an outcome of the productivity. If your productivity is good, your turnaround time is less. And that is the third KPI. Fourth KPI is how fast can you evacuate your cargo from the port. That is the dwell time. So that's where the port function comes, because you have released the ship and how fast can you evacuate. So on an average, you look at any cargo, the higher the dwell time, the more it costs the end customer to pay. To give you a rough ballpark number, everybody knows containers. Every day that a container sits in the port, they lose between 2,000 to 3,000 rupees per container per day. So the contents of the container, even you look at 14 tons on the container, so 3,000 multiplied by average dwell time is about 4 days. So 4 multiplied by, that's 12,000. So you're looking at 12,000 divided by 14. That's 857 rupees is the extra cost that you keep on paying. Now, can you imagine if all the white goods that come in containers, what is the kind of inefficient cost that you'll end up paying? So that is the fourth KPI. Fifth KPI, which nowadays with the stricter controls available, is the pilferage. So that is a permitted handling loss. This actually accounts for only in the bulk and liquid. It's not for containers, because you can't lose a 20-foot or a 40-foot container. So what is the minimum handling loss that you can attribute because of higher efficient handling, because eventually any cargo that is lost costs money. Now, if you look at fertilizer at $400 a ton of cargo, that's what the cost of fertilizer is. Multiplied by, when you take 75, that's about 30,000 rupees per ton. And on a average vessel, if you're going to lose 50 tons, that's a hell of a lot of money. So the permitted handling loss in the contracts is another KPI that comes in, which you have to control. So therefore, that is one strict parameter that you should also look at. So when you look at all these parameters, right from your pre-berthing delay, turnaround time, available depth, your dwell time, and evacuation facility. So do you have? So when you take these 5 on your things, you can consider yourself an efficient port. Now, what goes into making the port more efficient is how transparent can you be, because all these ships, they ply international waters. There is a lot of paperwork which has to be done, a lot of declaration. Then you have the customs formalities, and in terms of logistics costs, I think you must be reading that we are at about 13% to 14% of the GDP, which is extremely high. And every day that a container waits is again a problem. So when a box, that is a container which everyone understands, moves, the train speed today is on an average of 18 to 20 kilometers per hour. Now that is way, way down compared to a truck, which is about 40 to 50. And sometimes when you, of course, in the COVID period, now the trains are moving at about 30, 35 kilometers per hour, which is a good thing. But that again adds to your logistics costs. So if you were given an option, what is an efficient port? In the entire supply chain, you look at the efficient port. How fast can you get a ship in? Can you get the largest of the ships in? How fast can you discharge and turn around the vessel? Because every day that a vessel spends in the port, she is losing money. Now, just to give you a rough number, a decent container vessel of 10,000 TEUs, per day charter hire rates range in the $30,000 to $40,000 a day. So if you're keeping her for one day, that's $40,000 the owner spends just to stay in the port. Now, during the COVID period, you must have read in the papers for the crude oil tankers, their freight rates had gone up, daily rate charter rates had gone up to $200,000 a day. So you can imagine if you're going to keep her for 10 days in a port, what happens. So when that kind of a thing builds up, you want to turn this vessel around as fast as you can. So you're designing your entire facility, and that is the mantra that we actually followed in our ports business when we started, with a simple philosophy: berths should wait for ships and not the other way around. So you had an efficient vessel handling, you had a reduced dwell time. The way the ports have been designed is a broader evacuation with a narrower marine side facility, overall giving an efficiency factor to the entire operation. That all this is okay. With the technology that we have today, you can actually do everything online. You don't have to physically visit the port. You only visit the port if you have to actually physically handle your cargo. You want to touch your cargo to see what it looks like. Other than that, you're doing everything online. So this is one aspect of the entire supply chain. So this, you say, as the supply chain or the logistics of the entire international trade, this is what it is. When you move out from the port, now you are going out and you have an option of a road transport, you have an option of a rail transport, you have an option of a pipeline transport. How fast can you actually load a tanker? Let me take a liquid. I've given you a container, I've given you a dry. Now let me take a liquid tanker, for example. A liquid tanker, when it comes in, carries only 20 kl. But compared to a chemical tanker, a ship which comes in with 10,000 divided by X, you'll end up with that many number of tankers. So if you're going to get 400 tankers in, how efficiently can you actually load, and what is the simultaneous operations that you can do? So what we say in port design parlance, what is the peak capacity? Repeat, what is the peak capacity that you can handle your multiple evacuation mechanisms like the trucks? Say, for example, if you have a liquid tanker, can you handle 20? Can you handle 40 at a time? If the answer is yes, then again you are efficient because your truck is coming in, you go straight to the loading bay subject to documentation being right, which can be done online, and then you go straight out. So in to out is not more than 60 minutes. So that's again your efficiency factor. Of course, once it goes out, there's very little control that you have. But the technology that is available today, let me give you an efficient, everybody must be seeing the container ports, the fully mechanized container ports, where you see the horizontal transportation, where you don't see drivers in the trucks. Similarly, if you look at the Indian liquid terminals, on an average, you'll see about 60 odd people over there. But you look at a fully digitized liquid handling facility, which is available in some of the European ports. You decide when you want to pick up the cargo. So there's a vehicle booking slot available. You have a smart card because the tank is yours, it's dedicated. You load in how much you want to evacuate subject to your truck specifications. You go in at the assigned time. You swipe your smart card inside the reader, get in, go into the loading bay, swipe it there, exact quantity like the fueling station. Here you have assistants fueling your car. Internationally, that's not there. You just go and pick up the snout and you put it inside. You fill in either the cost or the liters and you done. Exactly, this is what the smart thing does. You go out, again, there's no weighment. The Indian way is weighment because that's the way we structure it. You go out and you have only 2 people manning the entire liquid terminal. Whereas in India, you see about 20-25 people. That is fully automated liquid terminal. Again, you go to a fully automated terminal on the container side, a fully automated bulk terminal. All these are possible. Do they have them in India? The answer is no, because the wage in the European country for a crane operator is about 180,000 euro, whereas here it's about 4 lakhs. So you have so many people, so therefore that is the only deterrent factor. Then when you're reaching the customer's doorstep again in the entire logistics chain, what is it that he wants? Does he want the entire container to be there? He doesn't have space. So that's where you have the container freight station, something called unique in the country, the most inefficient way of handling containers. But that is reality. Slowly and steadily it is changing. But when you look at the efficient mechanism of handling, you have to ensure that the cargo is on wheels and the wheels keep on moving. So whether it's the ports, whether it is a ship, whether it is a train, or whether it's the container which you're opening, or the bulk you're consuming, or the liquid you're consuming. So this is an overview. I think once you start seeing the port, whatever I have said, and maybe you can do some reading of on the subjects or whatever 4-5 points which I've told you, and then you'll realize what it is. And any questions that anybody has, I know it's a half an hour slot because with 37-40 years of experience, I can just go on talking, but it's a little difficult to talk in front of the screen where I can only see Professor Mukesh and myself. So anyway, that's all from my side. Mukesh? I can't hear you.
Okay, somebody muted me, so now I'm back. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Captain Abhyankar. It has been a wonderful insight. Very simply and very efficiently, you have covered the entire gamut of the ports and the logistic operations. I would definitely welcome all the questions which all of you would definitely have in your mind. So please feel free. The first question which is coming in from Manthan is what is the reason and vision behind Adani Port's acquisition of Krishnapatnam Port in the east coast of India?
So let me give you the vision. See, if you look at ports efficiency, you look at the cost of a truck handling. at 5 rupees per ton kilometer. So ideally, if you're looking at the low cost of operation or the lowest logistics cost, an ideal port should be located, you should have one port at 50 to 70 kilometers away from each other, of course, provided the industry supports it. Now, we would like to form the Sagarmala around the Indian peninsula. So when we are discussing with a customer, we can give him a multiple choice. Because when we go to a customer, we don't only tell him, I have something at Mundra. I can tell him, in case you're bringing cargo at the East Coast, you're bringing cargo at Calcutta, you're bringing cargo in the South, I have a solution statement for you. So what we are discussing with the customer, we have to move away from just a one port, but telling him that whatever your challenges are in your supply chain, I am ready to give you a solution. We were devoid of any presence over there. So that was the idea of picking up Krishnapatnam port. Going forward, wherever an opportunity does arise, we will pick up the ports and assets over there to give an overall better handling experience to the customer. Just to give you an answer, if you go back, I think Professor Mukesh will guide you far better on that. That's what I learned after my sailing days coming into port. We used to handle coal in Mundra those days at 250 rupees per ton. Today, because of the efficiencies that are there, you are handling the same thing at 220 rupees a ton. 2005 to 2020, you look at the inflation rate, 15 years have passed, the rates have remained the same. That's what efficiency actually does to the end consumer's cost. So what we are trying to do is acquire and give the best solution to the customer. Everything revolves around the customer.
Excellent. Thank you, Captain Abhyankar. The next one is from Dev. He's asking which weighs more in terms of the charges, handling charges or the rent for the container being on the port for several days? Yeah, okay.
As I said before, anything that stops movement costs, but it doesn't cost as much as the handling charge. So handling charge is the terminal handling charge, as we call it, is far higher than the storage. So on a percentage wise, if you're looking at the storage income, you're looking at a 5 to 7% storage vis-a-vis as an overall pie. So that is the kind of storage. But when you look at 5 to 7% of inefficiency, then it weighs a lot.
Great, thank you. Two questions on the same line. One is from Dakshesh and other is from Barka, which is what are the problems faced by Adani at the start of Mundra? And Barka is asking on the same analogy, what is the success behind Mundra port?
The problems that we faced in Adani ports, we were trying to churn the ocean. And when I say we are trying to churn the ocean, we wanted to be the most efficient. I will give you how the thought process actually emanated. One day the chairman called me, he said, Unmesh, I want to bring the largest of the ships into Mundra port. Can we do that? I said, yes, we can do that, but there is a limitation on the channel depth available. He's saying, suppose we dredge. What happens? I said, yes, we can dredge, but it's going to be prohibitively expensive. So with that kind of a drive from the chairman and the team members, people were experimenting because a lot of the team members did not have the actual handling experience. So what we had was a team which was given a free hand to experiment. And I remember in those days, we had the guest house in Mundra and a very nice photo frame was there. It is better to have tried and failed than not to have tried at all. And any failure that happened, the question never came from the chairman what went wrong or who was to blame. Not a single person was blamed. It was what went wrong, how can we correct it, and what is it that you require to correct it. So, with the kind of risk taking appetite which started from the chairman, everybody was told only one thing: the debit belongs to the boss, the credit belongs to the people who execute. That was the motto behind Mundra's trial and error, and the success that we have actually had. Experiment, even if you fail, don't worry, nobody is going to hang you. Hang the problem statement, not the individual. And that is what I had kept telling everybody. Please go ahead, experiment, because that was the mantra that the chairman followed and that the organization followed. So that is the success story is there for everybody to see. What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, it is actually addressing the same thing. What is the reason or what is the factor which has led to the success of Mundra Port?
Another example I will give you, I'm a mariner by profession. I've also been a marine pilot for 10 years. And when I joined, we had only restrictions that we will not do this, we will not do this, we will not do this, we will not do this. So first day I said, we will do everything. Now, what does it take to do everything? Now, having been a pilot myself, I fully understood the risks. So I got the team together. I said, let's challenge. You're saying, suppose something goes wrong. I said, I'll sign the document. So anything goes wrong, it'll go wrong with me, nothing to do with you. And believe you me, we have not had a single incident. So a leader has to lead from the front. What we say, walk the talk. If you can instill that confidence in your team members, you all are going to head ports one day. So when I say lead from the front, in true sense, if something goes wrong, don't say, I told you, no, you should have taken care. That's a recipe for disaster, recipe for non-inventing, recipe for mediocrity. Lead from the front and be bold enough to take the blame. Believe you me, 9 out of 10 you'll succeed. Maybe you might fail once, twice, but the failure teaches you far more than by not doing anything. This is a simple thing. I'll make this statement. I think we have lost you. Professor Mukesh, we have lost you.
Yes, sir. I think we have lost him.
Yeah.
I'll just sort of, call him and ask him to log in again.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a connection issue, which has been
No
resolved.
issues.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next question. Okay, where are we? Okay, this one is from Pochimi Reddy. Sir, if a vessel is late by a significant time and other vessels are scheduled at the same time, how do you make sure that the vessel is evacuated and the turnaround time is achieved in less time? So,
See, as I said, it
slotting.
depends. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it is about the slotting.
Yeah. As I said, vessel arrival into a port has a notice period 10, 7, 5, 3, 2, 1 day notice period. So if a vessel is getting delayed, you have advance warning. Today, the technology is available, of course, at a cost. You can actually track the vessel from her departure port right till the time she comes over here, and you can get the speed and actual time of arrival. But nonetheless, you have made a statement that she does get delayed. Now, if she is coming off her window, that she's got a particular slot, then she has to wait. But if vacant berth is available, then she can definitely be serviced. So again, if you remember my first statement, 65% berth occupancy. So by and large, the probability that you will get berth space available is very high. So therefore, you will still be able to serve her properly and ensure she can maintain her turnaround time. But where your berth occupancy, where you have proper scheduling, even at 80%, that's what you say is 100%, you still have some windows. So there will be a slight delay, but you would definitely be able to service her, because then that's what you have spare capacity available, which you have to put. And as I told you before, peak capacity versus average. So you kick in the peak capacity, start discharging, and start ensuring that you are hitting the peak in spite of your contractual conditions might not be requiring that. So customer facing organization, we should look at what the customer wants and deliver.
Yeah. All right. Two questions on a similar subject. One is from Ketan. Some insight on the port modernization and the new port development. Other one is from Anchal. What are the future skills and training needed for the post-COVID for the port operations?
See, port modernization, as I covered during the half an hour, building an asset around a commodity. So if I look at yellow peas, now India imports about 2 million tons of yellow peas in bulk. Now, ideally, you should have a silo storage. But since you're only importing 2 million, then the investment doesn't justify. So you have conventional go downs. Then you do fumigation. So port modernization, an ideal port, when you go all over the world, I've seen practically most of the ports in the world. I wouldn't say not all of them, but most of the major ports across from east to west, circle the globe 3 times. So when you build a particular asset, say I gave you coal, look at container, you look at LNG, you look at LPG, you look at break bulk. So all these kind of things, when you are building that asset, by and large, your efficiency is there. And that's what a modern port is, designing the asset around the commodity that you are handling. That is what port modernization is. Now, when it comes to the Indian perspective, the major ports, the way they're governed, they're practically landlord ports. So government's intent of investing over there, it's 2 steps back, 1 step forward, that kind of thing. So unless it really goes into the private sector's hands, I don't see any success happening, because there's too much of conflict of interest within the existing organizations over there for it to be modernized. That was, hopefully that answers the first question. And what was the second one?
What are the future skills and training needed for the post-COVID scenario in the modernized ports?
Yeah, many forums, they've asked me this question: how will digitization affect the overall port business? I think you have, ladies and gentlemen who are listening to me, a container has to be physically offloaded. That is not going to change unless you have a Star Wars kind of scenario where you say, beam me on, and it goes right from Mundra into Delhi or Bombay into Delhi. So that physical aspect is always going to be there. So the skill sets that you require primarily in the port sector, they have remained the same. I don't see much of a change happening from the time that I know of. You require a crane operator, you require a bagger stitcher, where you can dispense with, you can automate it. So wherever the human being was there, that can be automated. The front end, what you automate, but you have to realize the back end, the technical support, you still require human beings. So any fault line that comes, you might have seen an automotive assembly, you got all robots 100%. But to repair a robo, you can have one more robo, but eventually you have to have a human skill set. So going forward, as more and more digitization and automation kicks in, you're going to require more and more and more of technical support rather than physical hands and legs. That's going forward. But in India, at least for the next 20 to 25 years, I do not see that kicking in, because the kind of manpower strength that we have as a country versus the cost of manpower, that equation is still in the favor of manpower. Therefore, that is some time away.
All right. Okay. What type of risks you face while handling in a port? This is from Mohit.
Well, Mohit, the kind of risks that you face while handling any cargo is basic safety risks, because here you're entirely depending on your equipment. Now, when you lift a container, you're lifting 20 tons of container cargo. That is, you're lifting that container. So that means your hydraulic systems have to be 100% maintained. You cannot have a failure rate. You can't have the clamps opening. So people standing. So when you see a container being downloaded, you've got a truck over there. You've got the driver sitting inside. You cannot afford to have the hydraulics failing even 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million. Just not on. Similarly, when you're looking at coal or when you're looking at any other, you look at a project cargo. When I say project cargo, 1800 tons of boilers, that is the weight, and that gets moved, it gets lifted by the ship. You got people adjusting down below. You have to trust the gear. So therefore, risks are very, very large. But with experience, we have been able to mitigate them. Now, the first risk when you berth a ship is the polypropylene rope. That's 80 rope. When you start pulling, that's 60 tons of load on that rope. If that rope were to part, it can slice a human being into two. I've seen accidents in front of my eyes. They are bad. So the safety precautions that one has to take, and it has to be really serious that they think, and that if I have to stay safe, because any wire rope or polypropylene rope or anything that parts can have disastrous consequences. If you look at a car colliding against a lamppost, there's hardly anything. But if you look at a ship colliding, or you look at the cargo dropping, and you look at some of the photographs on Google, you see some of the containers falling off the ships. You get horrific views over there. Or I personally remember when I was in Baltimore, there was a car carrier which had come from Germany carrying Mercedes cars. There were some 3,000 cars. They ran into rough weather. All the 3,000 cars inside was smashed. That is the kind of risks and the damage that faced. And when she was rolling, believe you me, none of the crew members could actually go down and do anything about it. So those are the kind of dangers that you have out at port, and it is big. And when I say big, it is massive. So you got to be extra careful on that.
Thank you. How Mundra port became the largest port in comparison to the other port? How did it become the most profitable port from Pooja?
Pooja becoming the largest port, you have to first appreciate that there has to be cargo. That means a customer has to be there. So the way the chairman's vision was, you have say 60% tied up cargo, which might not give you a lot of money, and 30% you play around in the spot market. So the cargo was designed in such a way that you build the power plant. So inherent cargo, say 30 million tons of cargo was there over there. You had a steel mill over there, so another 2.5 million. You have a vegetable oil, again, that was there. So the core cargo was there because the industries were around. And that led to the march onwards where the refineries were there. There were two refineries up north. They had to have 32 meters of water depth where with the full flexibility. So again, they were connected to Mundra. Again, you had 25 million tons of cargo over there. Containers, everything goes to Delhi because that's the consumption center for the country. JNPT versus Mundra, you have 400 kilometers of distance differential. So with a 1 rupee 50 paisa per ton kilometer cost differential between train freight from Mumbai area to Mundra to Delhi area, that's 6,000. So that was the cost part. What we did was we built the depths, we built the berths to handle the largest of the ships. The rest is history. So that was the march to becoming the largest port. But when it comes to being the most profitable, again, my first design the asset around the commodity. First, pre-berthing delay zero. Ensure the turnaround time is there. So when we talk of EBITDAs of 70%, now it has gone up to 76%, and we are challenging the 80% mark. How to make yourself efficient is how do you cut costs. Now, cost is something which is under your control. Revenue is never under your control because the customer's willingness to pay is always minimum. So what you can control is your cost. Now, if you have to control your cost, first and foremost, write down each and every process. and start challenging everything. When you challenge each and every process that is required, 9 out of 10 times you will realize there are a lot of unnecessary processes that people follow. And the main example I would say is saying, suppose my boss asks me, so I have to be careful. So I buy an insurance policy, introduce a process. These are the kind of inefficiencies which get built into the system, and therefore your costs keep on going up. Whereas once you put the entire chain across, you look at each and every cost element, then you realize whether it is really required, it's not required. When you can measure everything, you can manage everything. That is a basic management principle. If you are not able to measure, you can be rest assured you can never manage it. So start measuring every activity that happens. If 1 ton is moving by 1 inch, please measure the first part, please measure the second part. Then you will have the answers, and then you control everything. Once you control, you are the most profitable. So when you're giving a proposition to a customer, what you're making a statement on a standalone basis, I might be expensive, but give you the case $40,000 per day. If you are discharging at 10,000 tons per day for 160,000, 60 days multiplied by $40,000 is X. Whereas the same ship I can discharge in 1.5, 2 days. That's $80,000 versus 110X. So 8X, that's $320,000 I'm saving. That's so my actual tariff might be high, but overall total cost of ownership of the cargo is lesser. That's how we have become more and more and more profitable. And we keep on challenging ourselves. And just to give you on the light of this, when I first joined Mundra Port, my first HOD meeting, we were discussing our competitor Kandla, because that time Kandla was the port which was everybody used to look up. I said, gentlemen, it was just 2 days old in the organization. I said, if you look at Kandla, we'll never improve. Let's look at Singapore, let's look at Japan, let's look at Rotterdam, Antwerp. Otherwise, in next 3 years, we'll surpass Kandla and we'll all feel very happy, complacent, and that's the end of our survival. Getting to the top is easy. Maintaining yourself at the top is the most difficult thing. And that is what we try and strive. Yeah. Can't hear you.
Sorry, I keep running into small issues, but
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I hope that was okay for Pooja. Again, you're frozen.
Okay, I'll take a moment to say something.
Sure.
Captain Unmesh, every time I hear you, I feel like a new kind of energy.
Thank
Every
you.
time I have a conversation with you, and the way you explain ports, the way you explain ships, and the way you explain the work, it almost comes like, you breathe ports, you talk ports, you sleep ports, you dream ports, you eat ports. That's what the feeling that I get when I listen to you.
Thank you.
How did I mean? Is this just because you were there and you have spent so much time? How do you continuously get your drive from? Because so much you have achieved already and so many years back. How do you keep on going with that drive?
Everybody, as I keep on telling, everybody, even the youngsters, I keep on telling, kuch nasha rakho. Keep that passion for something, whatever it is. This happens to be my passion. As a 19-year-old, when I had set out to sea, I flew all the way to Rotterdam, joined the ship, came to Bombay, and as an apprentice, standing outside. In those days, you had a huge delay in Bombay. So captain phoned up somebody. He said, "Arey, just tell him my ship is there." So I asked him a naive question. I said, "Why did you phone him up?" He's saying, "If I didn't phone him up, you would be waiting outside for 3 to 4 months." So at that point in time, as a 19-year-old, I said, if I ever get a chance to run a port, I will ensure no ship waits outside.
Wow.
So, and thanks to the Adani Group, I got an opportunity with a free hand to experiment.
Very true. Very true. Professor Mukesh, you are back. So I'm just looking at a last few questions. I don't know where is his sequence, but Barkha is asking a very entrepreneurial question. She's saying, Mundra, you took over and you developed so many things because it's a backward area. So for the
Right.
next greenfield port, would you look at another backward area?
See, Barkha, we have to understand one thing. First is to make a port viable, it has to be located in a consumption center. But then the profitability just vanishes because you can't get land over there. So you have to look at a particular area where you will be able to have the supply chain available to deliver the cargoes. So ports can be located anywhere as long as land is available. So that is the least of the concerns. With the prowess that we have in dredging and in operating ports and everything, wherever they are located, it's immaterial. But how to efficiently run them is the learning that our group has. And with so many people being trained over there, that has become normal now. But same thing if you had asked me about 15 years back, it used to be a daily struggle just to see what somebody else was doing and why couldn't we do better. And there are so many examples that we have gone through with this. So backward city, it's in fact, if you build a port in the city, you get labor, but you get them expensive. So your cost of operation by default goes high. Whereas a backward area, your cost of operation goes lower, and getting people and training them in-house is never a problem. And just to prove this, as they say, proof of the pudding lies in eating. When I was heading Mundra, there were two of my stewards who used to serve me. I said, start training and go and be a crane operator. So even they got a shock of their lives. So total, I think I trained 6 of them. I said it's open just to make a point that anybody can, with proper training, do basic things. I'm not saying they have to study complex drawings and everything, but the basic operation in the port remains crane operations, the horizontal transportation, loading and everything. So that can be done. So proof of the pudding lies in eating, demonstrate it and do it. So therefore we never had a problem. That's where our
Great.
costs were under control.
Professor Mukesh, back? Okay, I have another chance then. So there is
Yeah.
another question by Preet. She is asking, what were the kind of regulatory challenges that were there while we were looking at setting up Mundra port? How did we manage them?
See, I often cite this phrase. In India, it is innocent till proven guilty or guilty till proven innocent, vice versa. And
Yes.
unfortunately, I'll give you a very nice example. I happened to go to Shenzhen, Scheveningen, not Shenzhen, Scheveningen. It's a port north of Rotterdam. I landed on Friday on a reefer carrier and I handed my documents to the agent who visits, husbandry agent, to hand it over to the customs and immigration that we have come. He said, "No, keep it. Tomorrow they'll come and collect it." So it stayed on my table. So that was Friday evening at 5 o'clock. So again, we went out in the evening, Saturday, Sunday. He went on the beach, came back. We were having a beer, and then again I handed him the documents. So he said, "Did the authorities not come?" I said, "No." Those days, the mobile phones were not so well developed. So he
They were
a big,
satellite phones.
yeah, mobile phone. And I said, "Where are you calling?" He said, "I'm calling the chief commissioner." I said, "For what?" He said, "I'm a taxpayer and his people have not come and it has caused you inconvenience. So he has to give me a written answer." And this guy really called him up. He says, "What
Oh.
happened?" He said, "From Friday evening, 5 o'clock, they have been inconvenienced. That is human rights." And they have not been able to go out. I said, "I've gone out." He said, "No, no, just keep quiet." So 2 o'clock, two people straight from the beach. They came fully tanned. He's saying, "Captain, why did you complain?" I said, "I didn't complain. It's the agent, whatever he did." He's saying, "Your ship is regular. Please be rest assured. We will come and collect the documents. Don't complain." In India, can you imagine that happens? So this is the kind of regulatory. There are enough regulatory, you can go on and on. But in a nutshell, regulatory hurdles are there practically in every business that you do in the country today. Innocent till proven guilty or vice versa. What we are trying to drive now, this Pooja, right?
Uh,
You ask a
uh,
question?
yes, yes. Just a minute. Not to Preet.
Preet. Yeah. What we are trying to do is in Mundra Port, the first thing that we started off is faceless interaction. We said nobody comes into the port to discuss transactions. Transactions are done online. So I don't even want an iota of doubt in my mind that regulatory or Mundra Port hurdles come across for the customer. Similarly, we are trying to drive that with the government. Wherever the transactions are there, they should be faceless. And if everything should be done digitally, that is the safest way and best way to go forward. When it will happen, thanks to COVID. In fact, many a times I thank COVID because this is one thing that it has taught everybody. Because today you go to a government official and tell him I'm coming to meet you. He say, no, don't worry, please don't meet me. So
Yeah.
it from where you can avoid transactions, where you can avoid meeting, and where you can do that is the most efficient. So regulatory frameworks by default will collapse.
Pratik
Okay.
was asking. Okay. Yes, carry on,
My
please.
my my apologies because I missed the track. So please continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a question by Pratik. This is my last question. After that, you take over.
Right.
Pratik is asking a question. I'll modify that a little bit. He's
Yeah.
asking how Mundra Port fighting its competition with nearby ports, Tuna Port and Kandla Port. And my modification to that is how does Mundra Port compete with itself?
The competition management, as I said, 2005, I said if you are looking at Kandla as a competitor, then we will, within 3 years, we'll achieve. I'm saying give the customer an experience that he should go by choice. I'll just give us a very small example over here. How to bag a customer. When I used to do pilotage, I used to do 1 month on, 1 month off. So this is Hatke example, nothing to do with sports,
Uh-huh.
but how to win a customer and buy him in. So 1 month chutti, I went and bought hapus mangoes evening. I saw a lady in a college selling these mangoes at 250 versus market rate was 200. So she said, my mangoes are not spoiled from inside. I said, how do you have an X-ray machine or something? She chased English. Huh? You don't see a mango seller conversing in English. She says, in case the mangoes are spoiled, I'll replace them. I said, sure. She said, yes. I paid 50 bucks extra for a dozen, took them, and I was cutting the mangoes, enjoying the really nice. I wanted one of the mangoes to be spoiled, just to prove my point. And actually, I did find one rotten mango. And after they were over, again I went to her. I said, one mango was spoiled. She promptly put one mango inside. I said, no, I don't want that extra. She said, no, that was my commitment to you. Then I got friendly. She said, see, you were trying to prove a point that I don't know inside. I was trying to buy a customer for life. By one mango, I charge you 50 rupees extra. You still pay me that, and you willingly come and buy my mangoes when you know you can get equal mangoes outside. What did I
True.
do?
True.
So that's what we do at Mundra Port.
Good, good. Yeah, that's a fantastic example to prove the point. Professor Mukesh,
Yes.
yes, please.
So I hope you have been able to kind of cover the in-between questions where I actually missed the track because of some technical issues here. Um, After this, there are two more questions. Is it important to handle the cargo in the safe and efficient manner? And it can be done best with the automation and digitization. And so by incorporating artificial intelligence, how do you the ports use the artificial intelligence and ML technology?
See, again,
This is
to
from
answer that
Manthan.
question,
Yeah.
yeah, Manthan, you can mechanize, you can automate, you can artificial intelligence is still way out. That's there for the container scanners. So I'll dwell on that a little later. But everything comes at a cost. We are still building the Trivandrum, that's Vizhinjam port, and the payback for a fully automated port in India is about 65 years, whereas a payback for a fully automated container terminal in Europe is about 5.5 years. So that is a cost differential. So any accountant will tell you it's better to go manual over here. When it comes to artificial intelligence, as I said, physically cargo has to move from point A to point B to point C to point Zulu. Whereas if you look at the container scanners, what is inside, it's like an MRI or a CT scan or an X-ray. As you get more and more experience, you can do it. That's what doctors, a 50-year-old doctor versus a fresh graduate out of college is going to start looking at it and not decipher an X-ray. Or a 50-year experienced doctor is going to look at an X-ray and forget about it. There's nothing wrong in it. But container scanners, what they're doing, they're peeping inside the container and seeing 0.1 millimeter of deviation, capturing the image and keeping on learning versus the manifest quantity. That's where they're using AI to ensure the container just scans and moves out. That is what can be done. But artificial intelligence within the physical handling, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it is there available anywhere in the world.
Okay, great. The next question from Barkha. She's asking, near Mundra, there was very backward area. So my question is, Adani will look forward for other backward area as well?
So then this question is asked.
Answered.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. Sorry.
No issue.
I request Dr. Sharma to continue for a while if you can, because I have lost track in between. You know,
So actually, I was getting into another meeting at 4 o'clock, but
Okay.
I think I asked. I'll tell you, what would be the ports of the future. I will give you a side message, which questions I've already asked. But
Okay.
to continue with Captain Unmesh, Barkha is asking, what would you look forward to port of a future? As in, what kind of structural changes or behavioral or systemic changes do you look at? Or let's say, if I modify 20 years from now, what kind of ports you will see?
Yeah, as I said, the existing technology for physical or magnetic levitation to move the cargo is not there. If that happens, it becomes much simpler. But the way the cargo moves right now, the ports of the future will be developed around the asset to be handled. So that specialization is happening more and more and more and more. So you get a class of cargoes, you will design the entire thing around the commodity that you are handling. So as the design of the port and its handling equipment will be around the commodity. Let me give you an example of LNG. LNG has been there for quite some time. The design has not changed, it still remains the same. If you look at a coal terminal, you look at a container port, practically everything remains the same. So ports of the future, unless you can have a Star Wars kind of thing, this is going to continue. And from the time I have been in ports and even before that during sailing days, everything remains the same. So automation will come in, and where the cost of automation versus cost of human, where that inflection point is reached, you will see automation actually spiraling towards more and more automation of the ports.
Krishna is asking quite a basic question. He's asking, what is the reason why Gujarat has maximum ports in the country, and does Adani has man-made harbors and so on? So there are other questions, but I think these two you can take.
See, Gujarat has the largest because there is a conducive government in the center. And as everybody knows, Gujarati blood wants business. So, whereas other states, they don't want business. So, there is more of regulatory hurdle, a question which was asked. So, it becomes that much more and more difficult for somebody to set up an industry over there. A classic case, I don't know the youngsters whether they have read about the Datta Saman story, where the textile mills just vanished out of Bombay, came into Gujarat. Gujarat was there with open arms. A recent story is the Nano from Calcutta. So, entrepreneurial spirit in Gujarat is there. So, therefore, that relationship between business and government happens to be there. So, therefore, it's not a problem. It is easy to do business over here. So, that is the first. What was the second question?
How is the port selection done, seeing the land and the state to investment?
The port selection again, it depends. First, you have to have the cargo, and you should be able to compete with the landed price at the customer's desk. If that happens, then it becomes an easy. But what we have learned, Adani, is we build a port, we build a deep water port, create an industry close to the port, keep the port at survival with the industries around, and then use that to catapult yourself into the next line, that is your spot cargoes. That is the business model that we have used.
Yashraj is asking about the comparison of Paradip Port of Odisha, and if we compare it with Vizag, which one is more efficient?
Paradip in Paradip is the most efficient for the simple reason there is a lot of mechanization. But even if you look at the efficiency factor that Paradip should have achieved versus what it is designed for, there is a lag effect over there. Vizag is old. The Vizag bulk export terminal during its time was good, but going forward today, those days you had a loading rate of say 10,000 tons per hour or 5,000 tons per hour. So you finish 100 in 24 hours. Today you have a ship loader capable of loading 35,000 tons per hour. So 10 versus 35, you're looking at 3.5x of higher productivity. That is the kind of efficiency factors which are available today. So they should have upgraded, provided the business was there. So that is catch-22 situation. Many times they don't take that risk, and then modernization stalls.
All right. Manthan, he wants to know the impact of weather on the port business.
Weather on the port business, see, today practically you challenge weather. Now, in the good old days at 25 knots wind, you would not berth the ships. Today you have tugs which are powerful enough, and the way the ports are designed, they are designed to continue operations even at 40 knot winds, and which is already done. We do simulations up to 45 knots, that's 35 knots of steady, gusting up to 45. Once the simulation results are there, whatever precautions have to be taken, those get designed into the port design, and then the port design comes. So weather per se today does not affect ports because they are designed to counteract the weather systems which are being experienced by the entire Earth today. Going forward, if the weather systems start deteriorating further, even I'm looking at by 20% or 25%, the ports are still very, very well designed. That's going to be another 50 years to 100 years for the weather systems to deteriorate that much.
Okay. Best strategies for a new port to attract the business from the shipping liners. This one is from Priyaraj.
Whereas shipping liners, again, you're dealing directly with where the end boxes go. You have to give them free in and free out, because there are two people who pay for a container. Is the person who pays for the container freight, and shipping line which pays for the port charges. So for attracting a shipping line, you have to ensure that initially the first few customers on a new port, you give them practically free of cost. You call them, you are my guest of honor, please come in, start the business over there. So the first 1, 2, 3, 4 customers, you make them enter. So the business starts coming in, and the next customers which line up after that, then you can start charging them. And the last of the customers, you can then charge them really peak charges. So once your port is very well developed, cargo influx is there, then it's not a problem.
With the shift of manufacturing to India, will it affect the shipping business into India in terms of the volumes, I suppose, Ashok? This one is from Ashok.
See, today, if you look at the Indian EXIM trade, you're looking at 80-85% import, 15% exports. With manufacturing base over here, when you have surplus, you're going to export that, and export that at a marginal cost. So marginal pricing philosophy, as we call it. So then the imports will shift to the exports. So eventually, ocean trade is not going to vanish. And as I said, please log on to marinetraffic.com to see the kind of ships over there. And that has just kept on growing. From the first ship which sailed in 1492, the ocean trade is not going to die down. And if ocean trade is not going to die down, wherever it is more economical to produce, we'll produce. Of course, China is a wrong example to set, but they did when we started off in 80s together, India and China. China has shown what can be done. So I don't think the trade is going to die down.
True. True. Shubhankar is asking a question. Which port in the world is the best port in all aspects, in every aspect?
There are three, as I said, you look at the 5 KPIs, which I said, pre-berthing delay. Again, when we started challenging Mundra with the rest of the world ports. I said our pre-berthing delay has to be X. When I looked at the turnaround time, when we designed the West Basin coal handling terminal, we said it has to have the highest productivity possible. And that's what we designed. Of course, we were lucky to design in 2010. When we looked at the steel handling yard, you looked at 2 steel handling yards. One is in Antwerp, one is in Hamburg. They do 20,000 tons per day. That is in 24-hour cycle. We do 22,000 tons. We are 10% better. So wherever we have tried, what we did was what was the best in the world? How could we ape them first and how could we better? So those were the targets which were set. So that is what we have actually brought to the country. And the experience, just to cite an experience, when the ship master comes in, first he asks, do foreigners run these ports? Internally you feel bad. Why can't Indians do it? But then when they say this is like any other foreign port that you visit, so that is the kind of efficiency factors which are there.
Very well. Very well. Okay. How much time a container stays in the port vis-a-vis on the waterways to roadways? This is from Binay.
Waterways to roadways, if something comes from the US, you're looking at 36 days of sailing, US to India. In the port, it stays for 48 hours. Then from there to reach Delhi, it takes about 72 hours. So that is the kind of transit times that you're looking for today. When you have the dedicated freight corridor, you will go from Mundra and you will reach Delhi not in 72 hours, but you'll reach in 24 hours flat.
Padimi Reddy wants to know the typical cargoes which are handled at Krishnapatnam.
Krishnapatnam is primarily 85% bulk, or I would say 80% bulk, 5% liquids, and 15% containers.
Okay, Nishant wants to know the scenario in the lockdown period. What were the impacts on the shipping? We had done a webinar on this, Nishant, but anyway, Captain Abhyankar will answer this again.
Yeah, see, COVID was a challenge because in any of a disaster management plan, this was a scenario which was not captured neither by us but neither by anybody else. One good thing we learn out at sea is you have the same set of people, that is total of 20 people which run the ships. So whether it's in storm when people are seasick, you still learn to run the ships. So with that kind of learning, how to prioritize what is required was the experience that was there that had to be shared across at the sites, which sites implemented very well. And again, be transparent with the customers. What you can't do, you can't do. So be upfront with them. Say, I have a COVID issue. I'm not operating at 100%. I'm operating at 60%. So therefore, you might cause delays. But luckily, it never happened. So the entire administrative gear was all pulled up to meet the requirements.
Okay, and the last question from Dhruvil. In fact, this will be a dream question. So to say that what is the dream project regarding the Mundra port?
Dream project.
Out of the different businesses at Mundra, what would you classify as something which has helped to realize the dream for the promoters in the Mundra port businesses?
In the Mundra port, there are multiple, but if you look at cargo handling efficiency, the fertilizer cargo complex that was created, it had there was a change in the way fertilizer was handled in the country. And after we started it, the entire country has replicated it, taking Mundra as an example. So Everybody would come from Delhi just to see that how it is done and replicated it. That was a dream project.
Okay, if you have 5 more minutes, we have one more question which has come in from Karan. He wants to know the main factors which have contributed to Mundra Port taking lead over JNPT in terms of the volume of containers.
Main issue is one excellent set of marketing team members, the excellent organizational thought process and philosophy, freedom to do what you want, and being transparent with the customer. I think I will have to leave.
All right, no problem. So,
Yeah,
my
chairman's review
dear
is on.
students,
I'm just
yeah,
leaving.
sure. Okay, so please join me in thanking Captain Abhyankar, and we look forward to your future guidance and support for those who opt to go for the ports and shipping management elective. Thank you very much, Captain Abhyankar. All right, I can stay for another 5 minutes in case you have any unanswered questions. I will try and answer those. Otherwise, we close the day.
Okay. Oh, right. Cutting off.
Janil, adverse impact on the ports after banning Chinese goods. There are two immediate things. See, number one is the consignments which are held up. Those will probably go into the full 100% custom examination, and there will be delays in clearing those consignments. The future consignments from the similar sources may get impacted in terms of not meeting the same business volumes. So to that extent, yes, there will be minor impacts, but in the overall context, when you look at the entire trade scenario, it is not going to have a major impact in terms of the big volumes. In terms of the percentages, it will be a very insignificant impact for banning certain portions of the imported goods.
Yeah, I've joined. Other meeting has got delayed. So
Oh,
you want me to
okay,
sign off?
okay. All right. So, anybody has any further questions? Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right then. It looks
Right.
like there are no further questions. So we thank you very much, sir, for your active and participation and guiding all the people.
Well, I hope I have been able to enthuse all the youngsters that they have not chosen a wrong profession.
at least the impact on this year's batch has been very significant. In fact, almost everyone has opted to take the shipping and port management as an elective, and I'm sure the next year we will see that repetition.
Okay.
One question has just come in. If you have the time, we can just try
Yeah, I
and
have the
answer
time.
this.
No
Yeah,
issue.
okay. Please tell us about the Vizhinjam port and about its operations at present. Akash.
Akash, Vizhinjam Port has been under the building process for the last 25 years. Again, somebody had asked a regulatory hurdle, what do you face? This is a classic case of a regulatory hurdle in live scenario. Because of certain regulation, this port never took off. The strategy for Vizhinjam port is any deviation for a ship which has to cross or move, take a deviation, cost money. As I said, $40,000 a day. You look at a benchmark. So you lose one, say 24,000, that's two. You lose $2,000 per hour. So that is the kind of money that every ship loses. So therefore, the way a ship has to move for refueling or transshipping or something, it has to be en route. So when you look at Europe, Colombo was an ideal example because you had to take a left turn around Colombo. So Colombo became from 0 to 7.5 million TEU port. Singapore was a classic case of, I think they're doing some 60 million. So everybody had to stop there. So they transship, they do. So we bring about 2.5 million tons of 2.5 million TEUs from Colombo. Transshipment, a lot comes from Singapore also. So building a port in Vizhinjam is the right choice because India has about 17 million tons of EXIM trade, which goes from various ports. So whatever gets transshipped outside in Singapore or Colombo can actually land in Vizhinjam. And operating philosophy, as I said, container, we will be a semi-automated port over there. Horizontal transportation will be manual, but key cranes, again, remote operation, ERTGs, remote operations. So that will be the first in the country to have a full-fledged remote operation the way it is supposed to be, not what is exactly being followed at all the locations right now.
Question from Vineet. Why is the water transport less expensive? The basics of the land and water transport.
Basic. I think you all are
Why?
young students. You all should be giving me that answer about the kind of horsepower you require to propel something by sea versus by road. The friction in the water is much lesser versus friction on land versus rail. So,
All right. Uh,
just a minute, huh? Just 1 minute. Let me.
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Jinil and Dev have a question about the Chinese goods being banned and what are the impacts in terms of the additional charges that these held up consignments will have to bear.
See, first is that was a knee-jerk reaction because there was no written circular. It was just a verbal message, which they must have had ample reason to do it. But let's understand one thing that just 1 minute, huh? Let me just mute you once. Just 1 minute. Yeah, sorry. So India is a consumption center. So whether we buy it from China, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia, wherever, or Europe, we will still be consuming. So there is no issue on that front. There'll be a disruption in the supply chain, but I don't see much of an impact because what has to be imported will continue. So if you look at the pharmaceutical APIs, if they don't come from China, it'll take about 2 to 3 years to set them up in India. But in the meantime, we'll import them from somewhere else, though they might be more expensive, but that is how it would be.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Refueling bunkers are a permanent structure. A little bit about the bunker operations. Actually, uh, India as a center for bunkering vis-a-vis the other ports, and how are our group companies taking a lead as the major bunker suppliers in the Indian ports. This one is from Akash, so I've just modified it slightly to add some more aspects to that in terms of the bunkering business for the ports.
Hey, Akash, I'll very put it simply, a ship can carry, say, X amount of cargo. So when I say cargo, that means it includes lubes, fuel, provisions, fresh water, everything put together. Of course, now ships make their own fresh water, so they don't have to carry that much. So when it comes to bunkers, people work out the bunker cost. And in India, you have to import the bunkers directly, or you have crude oil and then you create the bunker blend over here. Because of our tax structure, it is extremely expensive to bunker in India. If you look at the petrol prices in India, it's at, I don't know, it's 100 rupees now. I don't know. Even diesel is about 80 plus. Versus you look at the petrol prices outside in Europe. For that kind of economy, the petrol prices are X. So therefore, the bunker business in India has never been able to take off. So till the taxation comes to realistic levels, it will never be able to take off. And Mukesh, I think I have to sign off. So
Okay,
4:30. So I'll just sign off.
let's close the session.
Yes.
It has been a wonderful insight, and we look forward to your future support next year.
Sure. Not a problem.
Thank
Right.
you so much,
So,
sir.
thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It has been a wonderful session. Do feel free to communicate. You can write to me uh, any time you have any doubts. I will try and answer your queries. Okay, have a wonderful day, and best wishes for your bright career.